into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God Damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God Damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God Damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Okay, hello, welcome to another episode of Pod Damn America, the stupid podcast for gothic children, hosted by me, Jake Flores, and that's Anders J. Lee.
Here.
Just present today?
Yeah. I mean, you said the name. That's all I need to do.
Wow.
Check me off.
Check me off, folks. All right, fair enough. Very serious Anders J. Lee today. Who's present. He said it like he was in class. And class is in session. We've got quite an episode for you today. We're going to talk about a lot of fun things. How do we start? What's going on, Durs?
Well, in my city, there's a mayor, a renegade mayor. He's he might do an eye patch at some point. It's pretty cool. He was under investigation, and then that became charges. Before the election, and he had one of these masterful gambits you hear about, where he decided to throw his weight behind Trump, which for a mayor of New York who's a Democrat, that means basically just not saying anything negative about Trump, which is like what the whole Democratic Party's identity has been for the past decade. So just by virtue of not doing that, Trump was like, okay, this guy's in my corner. And yeah, he was charged, and the DOJ announced recently they are dropping the charges. There have been 7 prosecutors in the Department of Justice. This is Trump's Department of Justice, who have quit in protest of the deal that they struck. Because if people remember, Adams, he went down to Mar-a-Lago and kissed the ring. He also had a full schedule for New York stuff on January 20th, and at the last minute, he went to D.C., and that was, kind of a slick way of avoiding scrutiny before the inauguration. And he's been talking to the Trump people, it's very blatant. This is all out in the open, and it offends conservative Republicans who are like, how could you do this? This is not what the DOJ is supposed to do. One of them wrote a letter saying that eventually you will find someone who is enough of a fool or a coward to file your motion to dismiss, but it was never going to be me. Surprise, surprise, they were able to find both a fool and a coward to go ahead with the dismissal. But the key thing with this is, I'm sure Adams asked for a pardon. That's, he went to Trump probably before he was president, before he even got elected, and was like, I'll help you out with whatever you need in exchange for a pardon. And Trump, I think wisely, has denied him a pardon, but he's kind of dangling it atop Adams's head or in front of him, because he is dropping these charges, but it's a conditional act, because in exchange, Adams is going to have to cooperate with Trump's deportation policy, which is like,
I'm sure it's heartbreaking to him, by the way. Protector of the immigrant, Eric Adams, we all know and love.
Yeah, I mean, he does, and this is, I watched the full exchange, the full interview that Adams did with Tom Homan on Fox and Friends, and it was awkward, but they kept going back to this thing like, well, the beautiful thing here is that we disagree on a lot of stuff. And even in that interview, Adams is saying, New York is a sanctuary city, and I'm more focused on people who are committing violent crimes and deporting them. And they're like, well, you'd agree to disagree about that because Adam is the mayor, and the law in New York City is that we are officially a sanctuary city. You can't just go in and deport people, but that goes. I mean, this is a tension we'll get to in a second. But um, the Emile Bove, who's the Department of Justice, the number 2 there, he's pretty openly saying that the charges against Adams are interfering with his ability to deport people, and that's really the problem and the threat to America. And that's the justification, the legal rationale they're using for this deal. Meanwhile, Adams is trying to claim, he says, I never offered any trade of my authority for an end of my case, which pretty directly contradicts what Bove is saying.
I feel like we all should be able to use that in court. Like, you should drop the charges against me for not paying my rent because the charges are interfering with my ability to deport people.
Yeah.
Which we all know I'm doing all the time, right?
Right. Yeah, that should be, if this is a priority number 1 in America, then everyone's job should be secondary to deporting people if that's supposedly what they care about the most. So that they're pretty
everything's
open.
legal. By the
Yeah.
way, I just want to back up a little bit. Tom Homan, who we're talking about, is the new border czar, or the returning
Yes.
border czar. Sorry, and he
Well,
did
he
an
was-
interview. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, he was head of ICE, and now he's a czar, which is like a position that does not have to be confirmed by Congress for reasons we'll get to.
I gotcha. Okay, that's where the czar thing comes from. So he did this interview on Fox and Friends where they were talking about it, and there's a quote from it I pulled that I just wanted to. I don't know if you saw this, but when he's describing his relationship with Eric Adams, which I think we can agree is just bought and sold, is how I would describe their relationship. Like, Eric Adams is the most corrupt person ever. He will sell out to anyone. He's a lot of fun that way. But this guy said, quote, I came to New York City and I wasn't going to leave without nothing, adding he would be on Adams' case. Quote, be in his office, comma, up his butt. I had to make sure we didn't gloss over this. This is how the border czar talks. And he's up Eric Adams' butt. So he wants us to know.
Yeah. Which is interesting to hear him use that locution. I thought that was a early 2010s thing. I remember hearing that around that time, 2013. I remember someone was talking to me about coming over to my place for a party, and he was like, well, I don't want to be up your ass the whole time. And I didn't know what that meant.
You're saying it's early 2010s, like it's like on fleek or something?
Yeah, that's what I thought, because I remember hearing it in like 2013. It was like, this is what kids are saying now. And then by now it seems like it's pretty antiquated. But it essentially just means like you are fucking with somebody, which also used to mean something different. Now it means that's like a good thing.
I think up his butt is like 100 years old. I don't think that's 10 years old. That's crazy to me.
I hope it's literal, and that's maybe the defense that he's going to use, because both these guys are pretty reckless with their language. As Homan says, we talked cop to cop and we speak as cops. And so now if there's more legal scrutiny of this interview in particular, maybe he'll be like, well, through my trainings at ICE, we had to inspect prostates and people's posteriors to see if they were smuggling certain goods across the border. And that's what I will be doing with Eric Adams, because he had to get this agreement that they're talking about, and they can't go into all the details about what's in the agreement. He had to get it through the city council and around New York City without anybody finding it and pointing out all the things they wouldn't like. So maybe I hope
girl to girl.
Yeah. I really hope he's going to use that as an excuse, because Homan, I watched another interview with him on CNN where he was asked about that, and they were like, this seems like a pretty blatant quid pro quo. And his excuse was like, oh, well, you didn't see the rest of the interview where he was like laughing more. And he also, Eric Adams said, I'm going to hold you accountable, ICE, to make sure you're doing your job. and holding up their end of the agreement, which basically acting as sort of a representative of the federal government is to stay out of Eric Adams' butt and not charge him for any further crimes or not backpedal and go back to pursuing these charges. But Trump, I think, on a real politique level, has played this quite well because the second Adams gets out of line, they can just reopen the investigation or the case, and he would be SOL.
He should have just went to Turkey, just left the country.
Yeah, just flee and just be a mayor in exile in, in Turkey. But one of the main things in their agreement, so, and this is another thing Homan says, is like, well, we met back in December before Trump was inaugurated, and we already had an agreement. So this is nothing new. But that agreement, supposedly Adams wasn't getting tough enough and following through on the stuff he agreed to back in December, which it involves, more cooperation with ICE. And so he came to his office and they hammered out a deal. But one of the key things that was sort of floating in December and seems to be more concrete with this second meeting is Rikers, which we've talked about on the show. Rikers Island is going to give access to ICE so they can run operations from Rikers. They can handle prisoners who are here undocumented. This is a new sort of phase in the on the front of New York City.
They can learn how to talk like an authentic New York City criminal.
Yeah.
Hey, good looking out. Bet,
right,
my fellow.
Yeah. But another thing Tom Homan said, which was sort of disturbing, is he, in an interview to Fox, which, if I'm not mistaken, between the Trump administrations, this guy was like a Fox commentator for a while.
Yeah.
But recently, he said that the DOJ, now that it is not going to be pursuing Eric Adams, they're going to have more time on their hands, and they should investigate AOC, who had a webinar about knowing your rights for people who are here undocumented, just knowing what to expect, what they are entitled to if ICE comes knocking on their door. And he says this is an impediment to law enforcement and she should be investigated, which I don't know if I'd put past Trump's DOJ, and that could be, new precedent. But to back up a bit,
wait,
I did a little.
Can I say
yeah, sure.
Tell you something about the AOC thing?
Yeah.
So I read a little bit about that, and there's a quote where he says, "I'm working with the Department of Justice and finding out where is that line that they cross. So maybe AOC is going to be in trouble now." Speaking of the early 2010s, AOC responds on Twitter by typing in the capital letter, lowercase letter, capital letter, lowercase letter thing where you're making fun of someone and making them sound stupid with like the SpongeBob where he's leaned over real hard.
Yeah.
He goes, "Maybe she's going to be in trouble now." She does that to him. She quotes him on that and says maybe he can learn to read. The Constitution would be a good place to start. That's our millennial fucking Congress lady that we all hate, everyone.
She ate on that one, you might say.
The worst person you know has made a great point or whatever.
Yeah. I do wish she would bring that energy to Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic establishment. Mic drop. But here in New York City, things are kind of uncertain because I tend to think Adams is going to stay in that position. There's a mayoral election coming up. He's running. Another thing he said in the interview, he was like, because the thing, this is the outcome I'm terrified of. Andrew Cuomo, other shoe's going to drop soon. He's going to, bow his hat. I'm mixing metaphors here, but he's going to, the shoe is going to drop and then the hat will be bowed.
They're all clothing.
Yeah. He is Italian. He's going to get into the race for mayor of New York City. What's that?
You know how Italians be wearing clothes.
They do. They design them and they wear them. Sometimes not enough. clothes. They like to, it's a sunny place, Italy.
Unga bunga.
But so he's going to run, and he was asked. Adams was asked about that, and he was like, in 2021 there was another Andrew who was leading me in the polls, and you don't hear about Mayor Andrew Yang anymore. So basically saying he's going to beat Cuomo like he beat Andrew Yang. But Cuomo is poised to win right now, which this is going to destroy me because Eric Adams, as much as I hate him, I relate to him. He's funny. He's got the earring, which he was, for the record, he was wearing an earring in the Fox and Friends interview. Sometimes he takes it out, but not for FNF.
He puts it in when he really needs that good luck, the clutch.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a way to distract the viewers from Tom Homan saying that they're, engaging in corruption. But he's a learning disability. He's a funny guy. Andrew Cuomo is just evil. He just reminds me of every bad asshole boss I've ever had, or teacher who's a jerk or authoritarian. Like, he's just evil incarnate, and he's effective. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to work the bureaucracy. He doesn't get it to do anything good, but he can maneuver things in a way that Adams is not competent enough to do.
He's a
Which,
little funny.
yeah, it's right, but it's
Remember Mingle Mamas?
and the Spanx he put out, that was pretty good. I am gay. I am, yeah. That was funny.
I want to put you on the back of my motorcycle and ride into the mountains from a sexual harassment lawsuit.
Yeah,
a little funny.
It was funny, but it's still like the anger just overtakes me in a way it does not with Adams, where I can just laugh. But yeah, he's poised to win. And this is what people were saying in 2021 is a lot of people on the left were worried about Andrew Yang, and the word of the wise at the time was like, though, you should be worried about this guy Eric Adams because he's much more connected to unions, to law enforcement, to the city bureaucracies. And that was true. But Cuomo is like 10 times that. He can rule New York with an iron fist, and it's just going to be awful if he wins.
Eric Adams is corrupt in the sense that he's a cop. The NYPD specifically famously corrupt, but police are like their own country, kind of. Like he's not necessarily jacked into like stuff you get from being governor, right?
Right. Yeah. Which, speaking of the governor, pressure is growing for Kathy Hochul, as I like to call her, to remove Adams from office, which she is able to do. And I don't think she wants to do it for a lot of reasons. One is optics. Having a white woman from upstate New York take away, she wants to get reelected again. And black voters in New York City turn out a lot. And she may be overestimating how much they actually like Eric Adams, because his star has fallen among everybody who supported him 4 years ago. But she I think is also weighing the guy who is next in line, the public advocate, which is an odd, funny little position we have in New York City, Jumaane Williams, who is a socialist. He's, DSA adjacent. He hasn't always been great on everything, but he's certainly would be a huge improvement over Eric Adams, and ran against Kathy Hochul for lieutenant governor in 2018 and then for governor in 2022. He challenged her, so she doesn't want to make him the mayor. And if he did become the mayor, I think he would potentially have a good shot at being reelected, because right now he's not running. He's not launching a mayoral campaign. But if he's an incumbent, I think he might continue it forward, and it would be like Cuomo versus Williams, and it just incumbency does help a lot. But I credit to Zohran Mamdani, who's the DSA candidate in the race, who has said Hochul should remove Eric Adams, even though that doesn't bode well for Mamdani's candidacy, because if Williams is in charge, then the left is, there's going to be more pressure to just get behind Williams and fight off the centrists. Um, but yeah, we'll see. I want to believe that New York will see through Andrew Cuomo and his charades. He is leading in the polls, but there are a lot of people who are undecided. And once we get to the debates, you can bring up the sexual harassment and just all of the terrible things he did as governor. I did get into it with his press secretary a few months ago on Twitter, or one of his bulldog, I think, is like what the guy calls himself. He's like, yeah, I'm Cuomo's bulldog. It's like he's proud of it. But this guy, Rich as a Party, who was
Great name.
yeah, he was bragging about like all the people that were helped by free college tuition for CUNY schools. And as I pointed out, it's like such a small sliver of the overall student body who actually got free tuition. It was like means tested to death.
Yeah.
And that's
Democratic Party thing to brag about.
right. But yeah, these are the people who are going to be in charge again. People who would fight with Anders J. Lee on Twitter are going to be running the New York City's comms department if fucking Cuomo is elected mayor. So we must stop him at all costs.
Wow, the nightmare is reality. Rich as a Party is I know it's not spelled like that, like a sentence, but that's like poetry.
As a party, yeah.
Wish that name was not wasted on such a lame person, but such things happen. Yeah. No, it sucks. It really sucks, seeing people potentially or eventually actually in government, and you're like, I've talked to that person, or I know something really stupid about them, and yeah, there are no adults. That's something I think about more and more these days. It's like everyone is very stupid, and some of them are in charge of a lot of things, and it's probably better when people work collectively on shit, but instead we just have these jobs that like some weird dickhead is now in charge of. Think about RFK a lot right now, but whatever. Anyways, please go.
Well, speaking of weird dickheads who now have big jobs, Tom Homan.
Right.
I dug into him a little bit. He is from upstate New York, actually, and is Roman Catholic. And in Fox and Friends, he was like complaining about having to come down to New York City. He's like, I'm not leaving here unless I get something. And there's, I think, a weird resentment people from Western New York have towards the city. Not true of many people, but true of some. He's from West Carthage, New York. All 6 of his siblings are cops, firefighters, or nurses. There is and I read a profile of him from back in 2018, when he was head of ICE under Trump's first term. And this is in Huffington Post, and it was written by Roque Planas. But he joined the Border Patrol in 1984 after he met a Border Patrol officer while fishing in upstate New York. That's how he happened to get into this whole thing. He was just a cop, and he's like, wow, that sounds like a good job. And
Wow.
yeah, he's a border enforcement officer. And goes to San Diego, and there's like helicopters flying all over the place, and it's like an exciting moment. It's like, wow, I'm not in upstate New York anymore. We're near the other border, and things are a lot more exciting. Eventually, 1989, he got promoted to INS, kind of the precursor for ICE. And has basically done every type of immigration enforcement job. So he knows that bureaucracy inside and out, and does join ICE in the early 2000s when it becomes a thing. And I found this story really interesting. He has a kind of, I want to call it a radicalizing experience, but in like the wrong direction. When ICE is still fairly new, May of 2003, he's tasked with human trafficking enforcement, and he's been in this line of work for almost 20 years. And uh, the police discover an abandoned trailer in Victoria, Texas, at this truck stop, and the driver had tried to smuggle in more than 70 migrants who had recently come to the United States. They had gotten past Border Patrol checkpoint, and the trailer was unventilated. 17 of them suffocated to death inside,
Oh my
and
God.
2 others died later. Homan that day is supposed to give a speech in Dallas, but instead he goes to Victoria, and there's a Texas Ranger walking him through the crime scene, and they go into the trailer and they see all the bodies, and it's just like this genuinely traumatic experience. But in his twisted mind, he this like reinforces what he's already doing, and the cause of ICE and enforcing border law, instead of reaching the humane conclusion that we need, if you want less of this, it's time to change the border policy, loosen it, make it easier for people to come to the United States, or address the root causes for why they are coming in the first place, instead of just like tightening things up, because you're never going to stop the human trafficking if you're not going for the root causes.
Right.
So just a very strange sort of logic at work there, that motivates him to do border enforcement. And I mean, it is, I guess, humane on some level that he's shocked by this, but just reaches the just such an odd conclusion. I mean, this is how millions of Americans think of it, but I think it explains a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
There's always like multiple things you could take away from something like that. And what we get narratively is always like conveniently the most conservative take is then given as the only possible way of solving the problem or whatever.
yeah, right. Um, But the reason I wanted to look at Tom Homan is because, he's this now very public figure, sort of the face of Trump's immigration policy, and feels like a Trumpist figure. That's what another thing in this profile said, is that he would be well placed in like as a mid-level bureaucrat in like an authoritarian country, like South Korea, before it was democratized, or something like that. And that's true, but he is not. He's worked under 6 different presidents, including Obama, who gave him a presidential rank award in 2015. And this is while he's at ICE as the executive director of enforcement and removal operations. And Washington Post, Democracy Dies in Darkness, the sort of the paper of the resistance in some ways, they wrote this puff piece in 2015 that begins with Tom Homan deports people and he's really good at it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Not as good as me, Your Honor, which is why gotta drop the charges.
Yeah. But as they say in the article, as Americans fight over who the next president, whether the next president should build a wall on the Mexico border to keep migrants out or protect millions of them from deportation, Homan is actually hunting undocumented immigrants down right now, setting strategy for 8,000 officers on the front lines. So, this is around the time there was a quote unquote migrant crisis, people coming from Central America. And this was, one of the first times I think family separation was starting to uh, eke into the public consciousness in America. And he was definitely behind that, under Obama and Trump. He uh, managed deportations with the help of an expanded fingerprinting system that local police departments share with immigration authorities. So the infrastructure Trump is using today, uh, a lot of it began under Obama. And if you go back to that Washington Post article, they ask him because Trump is a candidate at this point, still kind of seen as a joke, but he's talking about immigration. That's like one of his top issues, and so naturally, a reporter's going to ask Obama's ICE guy, "Well, what do you think of Trump's proposals?" And he like refuses to say. He doesn't want to comment on it one way or another. Um, Another charming thing about Mr. Homan, apparently, this has been reported. There's two people who work at DHS who heard him referring to undocumented immigrants as "quote unquote" tonks,
What?
Tonks,
That's
which
unfortunately, I know this is a character from Harry Potter, which I don't think is what the comparison he's making is, but that would be pretty
is
weird.
that a Harry Potter thing too?
It's a lady who's like a shapeshifter.
She's called a tonk.
She's played by a very attractive actress who was also on Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay,
If they're
interesting.
calling her a no, what's her face? I'm going to be very mad, but I don't think that.
Well, tonk. It sounds bad. Sounds like a slur, and I guess it kind of is. But what it refers to is the sound that the baton or the flashlight makes when you tonk someone over the head who's just crossed the border.
That is a really cute way of describing an extremely racist, inhumane thing to do to somebody. But
Yeah,
I get it. It's kind of onomatopoeia, everyone. A tonks.
right. Yeah, he's trying to pitch himself as like, well, I am on some level he feels compassion, and he'll often say, there's parts about this job that I don't like doing, but I have to do it. It's my job. So he's trying to paint himself as someone who doesn't get pleasure out of abusing and deporting human beings. But then he's
Then
calling
you
them tongues.
never believe anyone in a position like this when they say this. You know,
Yeah,
they're always like, "Actually, I hate this the most."
right.
Very subtly, hornily while they're saying it. It's
Yeah,
a sadistic line of work. Tonks. This is
yeah.
making me so angry. Okay, go on.
Well, this might make you even madder. So when Obama is leaving office, Homan is about to retire. He has a retirement party. People give him gifts and stuff. And then John Kelly, who people may remember was Trump's, at first, the DHS head. He'd been a general and went on to become chief of staff and was one of the people in Trump administration who you could tell was just like, had it. It was just having to deal with this lunatic, and now he's completely, for the most part, there aren't people like this in the Trump administration. They all like deify him, and but anyway, Kelly calls Homan up and says, "I don't think you really want to retire. You should stay at ICE." And convinces him to not go to a cushy new job he was going to get in the private sector. And Homan returns all of his retirement gifts. And then when Trump becomes president, he demotes the head of ICE, who was there under Obama since I think 2012, and then puts Homan in charge. And uh, up to that point, the heads of ICE had basically all been lawyers and nerds who, when they went before Congress, they were like, "Well, we're doing this for national security purposes." They would talk about things like human trafficking, which I think the DHS guys said to you, right? Is that like, "Oh, that's our real job is human
Yeah,
trafficking?"
that's the line. That's the official, like, what you tell people, and I think they probably believe. Is that's a really valiant thing that ICE, that all this border security stuff is there to stop, and then everything else is anything bad happens. It's a byproduct of, well, we were fighting this thing that gets used.
Yeah,
It's wielded politically in so many ways.
right. And Homan is kind of represents a new era because even though he's been in ICE for a long time, he's like a rank and file uh, border cop, and he always calls himself a cop. I'm a cop. I'm a cop. He's not a
Guy's
lawyer.
he switched jobs so many times. Call it Homan trafficking, folks.
But in June of 2017, when he's acting director of ICE, he goes before House subcommittee just to ask for more money. And in a departure from all the like, oh, national security, human trafficking, yada, yada, he says to Congress, if you're in this country illegally and you committed a crime by entering this country, you should be uncomfortable. You should look over your shoulder and you need to be worried, which is not the stuff that ICE had publicly said before. They'd said it implicitly to migrant communities, but to have the head guy saying the quiet part loud was like a fairly new thing. You also had, one of Trump's first acts last time was an executive order that did away with Obama's prosecutorial discretion policy, according to the Huffington Post. And 2 weeks after that, within 2 weeks, ICE begins summarily deporting people, including some who had already gotten stays of deportation. They had been checking in with the agency. They were supposed to be, left alone, or they had an understanding. And then ICE officers start detaining unauthorized immigrants they encounter during operations, targeting other people. Becomes like a dragnet, which wasn't supposed to happen. And these once common detentions, known as collateral arrests, had been basically phased out during Obama's second term. So that was um, something Obama did do, is said, like, let's focus on violent criminals. If you got to deport somebody, and in theory, they're also working on a pathway to citizenship law, immigration reform, which he never really, put much weight behind. And this is kind of where it got us. Like that infrastructure was allowed to grow under his administration, even though like the mission, which Homan was effective at carrying out, was the violent offenders. The infrastructure for someone like Trump to come in and say, let's just deport everybody, was being laid, that groundwork. Um, but another thing when he was ICE director last time, which he's bringing back, is he does not like sanctuary cities, and he pleaded with the DOJ last time to prosecute sanctuary cities, and he's starting to do that again. That came through a little bit in the interview with him and Adams, where they're like, "This is something we disagree on," and uh, that could happen. You could see something maybe going to the Supreme Court about the right of municipalities to say that the residents are protected. Um, but to be clear, last time, so he is a czar, which means just kind of the president says, like, yeah, this is a czar and he's in charge of this stuff. And it's not like it's not a title that is confirmed by the Senate. ICE director is, though, but Homan was never confirmed because the president can name an acting director, but it takes a while. Congress moves slowly to confirm somebody. And back then, 2017, there were still more moderate Republicans who were skeptical of Trump, and they didn't. His odds of getting confirmed were not very high, so he was just kind of there for a few months to make a bunch of noise. He also whined a lot about um, the way ICE officers had been treated in the media. Um, but he's also kind of defiant in that he would do things like a town hall he did in Sacramento with a sheriff there, where there are people who show up to just like yell at them and say, ICE, get out of California. And he's like, no, ICE isn't going anywhere. We're going to do our jobs. We're going to enforce the law. And that, is not winning favors with politicians, the people whose votes he needs to keep his job. But as a lot of his contemporaries have said, he's really acting for an audience of one. He was like maybe ahead of his time in a way of like sucking up to Trump and not trying to be like the more reasonable person in the room. He's like, no, I'm on the Trump train, and we're gonna, do what he said in 2016 and deport people. But something that Planas notes in the article, which I think is important when he brings out this talking point that like ICE officers are treated so unfairly and it's a really dangerous job and people have died. The truth is, since ICE was created, there have been about 5 people who have died as ICE officers. 2 of them were the names Wilhelm and Zapata. They did die as investigators, but neither of them died during an immigration enforcement operation.
No, they died after
Zapata-
seeing someone saw a really funny comedy show around 2018, 2019.
Yes, Carlos Mencia destroyed them. No, but Zapata, which
Talking about myself.
ironically, oh, I see. Ironically, this guy's named Zapata. I think it's a guy, Jamie Zapata, who was an ICE officer.
That is really depressing.
Yeah.
Hopefully no association, no relation.
Maybe it was a rebellion thing. They wanted to do the opposite of their family had sort of been behind. But Zapata's killed outside Mexico City by a drug cartel. So it's not people coming over the border. He's for some reason they dispatch him to Mexico City. And then the other guy, Wilhelm, murdered at his home by a U.S. citizen who escaped from a federal courthouse and killed 3 other people. It's kind of a just random thing. And then Lorenzo Gomez died of kidney failure after collapsing during a special response team training. There have been 0.
That's counted here as a murder?
Yeah. It's the stress of training people to kick others out of the country can cause kidney failure, apparently.
Officer whatever's kidney, you're invited to tamale night, and you can shit.
But the reality is 0 deportation officers have died because of violent altercations with undocumented immigrants. It just has not happened. And that's, National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund data. So this thing about it being a especially dangerous job is nonsense.
Yeah, well, there's an extreme power imbalance when you're going after helpless people who are, for various massive historical reasons that neither of our stupid capitalistic parties are equipped to even understand, are, coming over a border that fucking this country created. There's a lot going on here that I find interesting. Something I always bring up when I talk about this with people is got to get it out of your head, if you're an average person, that this is a Republican thing and that the Democrats are fighting against it. As you can see, funding goes up for border security bullshit every administration, no matter what party they are. However, yeah, there is some interesting kind of like give in between looking at what Obama's administration did, what Trump's did. Trump obviously brought this shit to the next level and decided to get really like bloodthirsty and evil with it. But like that's led to this, I guess, like what you're describing here, where everything that happens under Trump is set up to happen by having this at all during Obama, as if there's some way to have like a humane way of managing a population, essentially, is it's part of the problem, right? This stuff's been on my mind a lot lately for obvious reasons, I think, but like the like the switching, the shifting narratively between what all of this is about is something that's really interesting, and it's a product, I think, of everything you just described. I watched this shit recently where Dr. Phil was doing ride-alongs with ICE.
Oh, yeah.
And he's sensationalizing it. He's a horrible person, as we all know. If you don't look into it, he sent people to fucking beat up protesters at the UCLA encampment and stuff. I've talked about it. But the way he explained it to his audience on the show was like, we're not going after Abuela. we're going after MS-13 guy, these dangerous immigrants, right? And that stuff, which is like the logic of the Obama era ICE and CBP and stuff like that, even if they truly intended that back then, it's seamlessly used as cover for doing what Trump wants to do, which is the logical conclusion of all of this logic to begin with, of all of this shit, which is go after literally everyone who is an undocumented immigrant, which raises the question, is that immoral? Is it immoral to be an undocumented immigrant? And in order to answer that, you have to listen to all of our podcasts and all of the podcasts and read all the books and think about the entire big picture outside of what two capitalist parties are equipped to explain. Hey, Murray, deport by an immigrant just now from the table. He crossed illegally, and it doesn't matter that I created the conditions that made Murray jump up on the table. If he gets on top of the fucking computer, then we have a crisis here. And he brought fentanyl with him, so fuck him. Yeah, I don't know. So where I wanted to go with this is I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens next with ICE, what's going on with them, because this like kind of like cyclical, interesting ebb and flow dialectical play between having a two capitalist parties, one that pumps the gas and one that pumps the brakes, going back and forth, never resolving the contradiction, ending in the present, or at least arriving at the present with stuff that just looks eerily fascistic because of the unresolved contradictions of capitalism, etc. Right? That's gotten us to a point where there are some eerie tech problems on the horizon, right? So this came up a lot to me recently because all those years ago, the first Trump administration, 8 fucking years ago, 7 years ago, whatever, I had this thing happen where I said a thing about ICE and it was a joke, and then they visited me. And if you don't know that, it's my lore, right? That's kind of where I came from on the internet, at least in my current form. But so people have been sending me articles about the new plans that they have for tracking critics of ICE, because for obvious reasons, because it's like maybe a funny joke to send me. Like, it's I get it. It's also kind of real, or it is real.
Israel.
They'll come up later too. But oh yeah. Also, before we start this part, another thing I wanted to kind of say to preface all of this is that something else to keep in mind when you think about Trump's sort of specific take on the border is that a lot of the numbers aren't even that different from administration to administration. They're going to go up. It's going to get worse, but the amount of people that have been deported thus far is kind of the same numbers as they were under Biden. What's happening is that we're thinking about it differently, and there's different rhetoric about it flying around. And it's obviously worse. What Trump is going to do is worse, and he wants to take it to its fascistic conclusions instead of denying that they are a logical outcome, which is what the Democrats do. However, it is important to get yourself out of the fantasy that when Trump wasn't president, this stuff wasn't happening, or it was being fought against in certain ways. I just think of it as the breaks. That's all. It's just managing it rather than leaning full force into it, right? So that being said, the tech surveillance stuff that ICE is doing right now also did not start yesterday. There's just a kind of new iteration of this stuff happening, and a lot of it is political, but a lot of it is just coinciding with this like swelling AI thing that we all have to deal with now. The Roko's basilisk or whatever being born, the baby basilisk. That's from another episode. I don't believe in the Roko's basilisk. Sorry. So anyways, let's talk about ICE. So ICE is using AI to supposedly like track people's social media. Reading from an article in 404 right now, ICE said ICE will require the monitor that it's using to identify and report, quote, previous social media activity, which would indicate any additional threats to ICE, as well as any information indicating that individuals or groups, quote, making threats have a proclivity for violence, and anything, quote, indicating a potential for carrying out a threat. So, interestingly, right now, one of the reasons that they're sort of like turning up the knob of we gotta like track people who potentially could be a threat to ICE, I think might have a little bit to do with like Luigi, because a lot of the language they're putting out is that they're concerned about threats to like specific figures, officers, and like people within the infrastructure of border security. Once flagged, the system will further scour a target's internet history and attempt to reveal their real-world position and offline identity. In addition to compiling personal information such as the social security numbers and addresses of those whose posts are flagged, the contractor will also provide ICE with a photograph, partial legal name, partial date of birth, possible city, possible work affiliations at possible schools or universities, any identified possible family members or associates. So what I'm describing here is this program called what is it called? It's called Ghost, which then is an acronym for Giant Oak Search Technology. And I think that has another sub program underneath it. There's a lot of programs made by other shell companies which are bought off of other things here, so we're gonna get lost in the weeds a little bit, and sorry, it's all Googleable if you're very curious about where one of these places comes from. But there's this thing called Giant Oak Search Technology that ICE is using right now, and essentially it's just this large database that can connect all this like metadata about people, which they're using to craft, files on people. Documents also request facial recognition capabilities that could take a photograph of a subject and search the internet, find all relevant information associated with the subject. The contract contains specific directions for targets found in other countries, implying the program would scan the domestic speech of American citizens. This is all happening via, like I said, Giant Oak. Giant Oak was hired during the first Trump administration and used throughout the Biden administration. So, I'm going to talk about Giant Oak a little bit, aka Ghost, G-O-S-T. So, DHS has used Ghost since 2014, according to a page that this 404 tech website, I don't know if you ever read them, they're interesting. According to a page that they acquired from their user guide. I guess this is like a sort of FOIA thing they acquired. The company behind the system, Giant Oak, has been paid excess of $10 million since 2017. A Giant Oak and DHS contract ended in August 2022, according to the records. Records also show Customs and Border Protection, the Drug Enforcement Administration, CBP and DEA, and the State Department, Air Force, Bureau of Fiscal Service, yada, 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 which is part of the U.S. Treasury, have all paid for Giant Oak services over the last 10 years. So I think like last episode, we were kind of talking about contractors that work for ICE and CBP, and this is one of them, right? Their catchphrase, which is included in one document, is, quote, "We see the people behind the data." A Ghost user guide included in this document that 404 acquired says Ghost is capable of providing behavioral-based internet search capabilities. Screenshots show analysts can search the system with identifiers such as name, address, email, and country of citizenship. After a search, Ghost provides a ranking from 0 to 100 on what it thinks is relevant to the user's specific mission. So the point of all this jargon is that the app, kind of, you get a general idea of what they're able to do here. They're able to link together all this metadata, given facial recognition stuff, or it's just like a starting point, like, oh, we have this person's name, they have their social security, their social media or whatever. And then an app that's run on AI and shit gives you a threat level from 0 to 100, and that is how they're sorting people and who to go after, right? After clicking on a specific person, analysts can review images collected from social media or elsewhere and give them a thumbs up or thumbs down. Analysts can also then review the target's social media profiles themselves too, and their social graph, quote unquote, potentially showing who the system believes they are connected to. So there's a human element in Ghost where they get presented all this stuff and they go thumbs up or thumbs down. They Tinder between people that they want to potentially deport or whatever. And 6'1", if that matters, is all I'm saying. I'm lying. It's 6'1.5", but that's a very hard thing to say. So 6'1", why not round up?
Round up, yeah.
The FOIA documents specifically discuss Giant Oak's use as part of an earlier 2016 pilot called the HSI Patriot, all caps, social media pilot program. Homeland Security Investigations, what HSI stands for. So 2016, Ghost did this thing, or I guess, Homeland Security did this thing where they tried to create this thing called the Patriot social media pilot program to track people's social media. Because back then, I think, God, I'm a living proof, they were kind of in the weeds back then, right? So since then, they've been trying to like perfect this ability to use AI to comb through massive amounts of information. The document adds that the process utilizes an automated social media vetting platform, which is designed to communicate with the U.S. government systems during the visa adjudication process and the time of the travel to the U.S. The platform is designed to ingest biographic data that is then utilized to search for online social media presence and provide vetting results at the time of a visa application. In a brochure included in the documents, Ghost says it searches both the internet and the, quote, deep web, a generic term that includes all manner of things such as commercial databases or sites hosted on the Tor anonymity network. So supposedly this thing's connected to the deep web or dark web, whatever the fuck, the intellectual dark web, maybe.
Ooh.
Maybe you're in there. Maybe there's something in there that they want to know about. In May 2018, DHS backed away from subsequent proposals to use machine learning technology and continuously monitor immigrants. CBP is using an AI-powered monitoring tool to screen travelers. This person reported this May. So there's been an asymmetrical sort of like embrace of AI given all this. CBP leaned a little bit further into it as far back as 2018. DHS has been kind of continuing to keep from just going full, we use an algorithm with this stuff, but they're getting there. So NSID, National Security Investigations Division, worked with the Giant Oak to help it with this problem, sorting through Arabic naming conventions around this time. So this is a problem that the automated algorithm that Giant Oak has, is that it doesn't understand Arabic naming conventions. This makes sense. I was training an AI bot for a stupid dystopian job for a minute, and it didn't understand like rhyming and stuff because it's drawing from like English language stuff, and the way they build a lot of the stuff is from acquiring stuff like Rosetta Stone type like shit that's just people have been building to understand one language forever.
Mm-hmm.
So they've had a problem with Arabic naming conventions. Someone reporting on this raised the question or sort of comment on this, like, why are they trying to understand Arabic naming conventions so hard? Probably for obvious reasons. In a 2017 interview with Forbes, Giant Oak's CEO Gary Schiffman said the tool is capable of, quote, continuous evaluation, which is where you want to see if there's a change in the pattern in their behavior over time. Schiffman told Forbes that while at the U.S. military's research arm, DARPA, he worked on Nexus 7, a big data tool used in Afghanistan. Schiffman is also a former chief of staff for CBP. So that's the big story right now that's coming out, is that they're using this thing called Ghost, and it functions as I described. Sorry if this is kind of messy. I went tinfoil hat mode on this earlier because I was very caffeinated, and it's one of those things that the more you read about it, one of the things I like to do is start looking into who the parent company of any of these things is and start connecting dots from there. And there's a lot of weird stuff that I got from doing that, which I'll get into next. But before we get off of Ghost, Giant Oak Security Giant Oak search technology, sorry, that ICE is using right now, I wanted to talk a little bit about AI. So while I was trying to sketch a timeline out of how long Ghost has been part of ICE, I used Google. And when you Google something now, you get this stupid automatic AI result that it's hard to kind
Yeah.
of turn off that shows up first. And I was thinking a lot about how there's a lot of problems with AI. It breaks my heart every time I Google something, and I'm like, I think Tree just died because I wanted to know what movies Hugh Jackman was in or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but part of it is that it is just not as good as they want us to think it is. It's very imperfect, and that's fine if you're using Chat GBT to try to come up with like a recipe or something. That's really, really dark considering the implications of what border security is trying to use it for, and some other stuff we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah. It's just
So,
like
good.
it reduces everything to like, are you trying to find out a fact, which not which it often gets wrong. The facts can be wrong. I've seen this Google, saying things that are just untrue. But today I was just curious. I was like, I wonder if anyone thought about James Dean playing Holden Caulfield in a Catcher in the Rye movie. Like, if has anybody thought about that as a thing? Was he considered? Did they think about making this movie? And the first result was just Google was like, no, James Dean did not play Holden Caulfield. It's like, yeah, I know that. I'm just,
Yeah.
that's not the point of this Google search. Not every Google search is like, I want to know 2 + 2.
Yeah, and it just doesn't understand like that's, what is the grammatic term? Like that was a clause in the sentence you
Yeah.
gave it, not the entire sentence, right? So I was Googling all this stuff and I Googled the question, how long has ICE used ghost? Spelled the way it's spelled as an acronym, GOST. And what I got was an answer from the AI overview, which told me U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was established in March 2003. It was created by merging the investigative and enforcement elements of U.S. Customs Service and the Immigration of Natural Service. That is not the answer to the question I asked. It just gave me a general definition of what ICE is. This came with a visual aid, which was a picture of Ice-T, the
Wow.
rapper
The
and
the guy?
actor.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, but it's presented like it's a Wikipedia page, like an information with a visual, like a picture. He's the fucking picture if you look up something about ice with AI. So clearly this shit doesn't work, right? It's potentially going like this is the same science, the same like method being used by ICE agents to decide whether or not someone should be rounded up, is asking a question and then just getting like fucking iced tea, which, you know, don't round up iced tea, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He's very heavily documented as being an American citizen, although you shouldn't be deporting anyone. Anyways, there's another program called Babel X that the CBP has been using. This is reported on by Motherboard in 2023. So again, all this shit happened straight through Biden. And most of this stuff, that's kind of the time frame is Trump 1 to Biden to now, because AI has been obviously a thing for a long time in nascency, but it's like been becoming more of a conscious thing recently. So Babel X is an AI program developed by this thing called Babel Street, or this company called Babel Street, which is a quote data analytics and threat intelligence tool. So Babel Street advertises itself as a contractor who works for like tons of government organizations, financial institutions, banks, arms of the military, you name it, everything evil, as quote threat intelligence. That's what it's for. It proposes to be the solution to something called the risk confidence gap. And I did a little reading about this. The risk confidence gap is basically just the idea that there is a massive amount of information to comb through when you try to organize data like this. So when you are making really important decisions based on an algorithm and there's a possibility for that to go wrong, they call that the risk confidence gap.
Ah.
BabelX is made by Babel Street, provides access to publicly and commercially available information in more than 200 languages across the public, quote, dark, and, quote, deep webs, according to the company's website, which adds that the tool is AI enabled. The CBP document says that some of the commercially available records contain social security numbers compiled by private third parties. BabelX is also able to perform sentiment analysis, according to the website. Think about that term. Sentiment analysis. So using these massive amounts of data to try to come up with like a way to quantify what someone's sentiment is, because a lot of this is trying to target and distinguish people as like hostile actors as opposed to like abuela, right? But that's a tool that wasn't specifically designed for like border management. A lot of this comes from them having like being like a management tool for companies to potentially risk like leaks and stuff like that. So like hostile actors within your own company. In November of 2022, Babel Street acquired this thing called Rosette. It's an AI-powered text analysis company that would help with, quote, identity resolution in the context of national security, verifying identities and preventing financial crimes. So Rosette was one of those things that was just a company that, like, you know, made probably the type of shit that Duolingo comes from or something, just analyzing massive amounts of language. They acquired this because apparently it helps sort of cook into the idea, like the teaching a robot how to use language, which, as we've discussed, doesn't fucking work. CBP has a regulatory check for its components potentially invading privacy. So Border Patrol, this is all kind of interesting because like Border Patrol and Homeland Security are kind of have like a FBI CIA thing going on where they're, you know, different versions of the same thing and have different ways of solving whatever problem they're trying to solve, and different philosophies variously. CBP, for whatever reason, part of the way Border Patrol has evolved is that they have this sort of check and balance, you know, built into it called privacy threshold analysis, or the other one is privacy impact assessment. Privacy threshold analysis, PTA, or privacy impact assessment, PIA. And basically what that means is that any like contractor that Border Patrol works with, every 3 years they have to do one of these bureaucratic TPS report fucking audits, called privacy PTA or a PIA, which supposedly is to keep breaches of privacy from happening, because I think that is them saying like, yeah, we are worried about potentially this sort of, you know, work we do becoming authoritarian in 1984, right? But that is a very imperfect system. It doesn't really work because, for example, BabelX, this thing that Border Patrol has been using, stores all of the information that it acquires for 75 years within Border Patrol systems. So even if you fire BabelX, they have a 75-year shelf life, everything that they've sort of established. And it's like, why would this thing work honorably and say, well, I'm no longer going to look at this data that we already own?
Yeah.
There's an add-on for what was it, BabelX, that is I'll read about it. So the document says that CBP also has access to ad ID, a capital A lowercase d capital ID is what this type of information is called. Ad ID information through an add-on called Locate X. There's like a million of these stupid app names for all the various like widgets and stuff that they've been using. Locate X is this thing that uses smartphone data location, or smartphone location data rather. Ad ID information is data such as a device's unique advertising ID, which can act as a useful identifier for tracking a phone and by extension a person's movements. Babel Street obtains location information from a long supply chain of data. Ordinary apps installed on people's smartphones provide data to a company called Gravy Analytics. They're all tech nerds, so they all have names like this. But anyways, Gravy Analytics then repackages that location data and sells it to law enforcement agencies via its related company, Ventel. But Babel Street also repackages Ventel's data for its own Locate X products. I know that's like a confusing octopus maze thing I just said, but long and short of it is your private data, every time you use a fucking like a private app on your phone that's just a company, it's being sold to one company that then works for a contractor for Homeland Security, Border Patrol, ICE. And long story short, that's how they're able to like circumvent a lot of regulations that actually are in place that should deny ICE and Homeland Security and Border Patrol the ability to just look up where your phone is. That is unconstitutional. It is theoretically something that they're not allowed to do, but because of this complex like octopus here, it's something that they're able to do because they don't have to go through like what do you call it, like warrants and stuff like that.
Is Octopus one of the company names too?
No, that's just something I cooked up. I think about it all the time because of Dark Money by Michelle Meyer, because she uses the term coctopus.
Oh, yeah.
That like it's
could mean different things, but yeah.
Tell me about it. This guy, though, coctopus, I imagine him wearing a little top hat because he's a captain. So yeah, CBP can access all this data without a warrant. They can do this thing called geofencing. There was like a somebody who quit CBP who talked about this. So there's this thing called geofencing where they can basically take like a Google Maps app out, draw a circle in a certain area, and then it just highlights everyone's phone in that area who they have pinged somehow by using these applications. They can click on you, figure out where the fuck you've been before that, whatever. Everything you've been imagining, it's all real. So this is all concerning given that you might think that maybe you will kill all your social media and that'll help you get out of this, or you just like won't connect your social media to stuff. It's kind of impossible to do this. Something I didn't know that I learned while I was reading about this is that to apply for a visa right now, you have to share your social media handles, which seems
what
it would be separate from government stuff. But
what if you're not on social media?
Right. I don't know. What if you say you aren't?
Is anybody like starting an account just to get a visa? They're like, this is my visa account. I love America. I love obeying laws, etc.
It is reproduce. My birthday. I am 155 years old. Those things on Facebook. Yeah. Maybe. There's another one called GeoSpy that the police are mainly using. GeoSpy is really scary. It's made by this company called Greylark Technologies out of Boston, and it's basically like spatial recognition technology. So what GeoSpy can do essentially is take a photograph that it just sees anywhere, probably on social media, and use a bunch of fucking data to piece together where it thinks you are in the world based on like vegetation in the background. The distance between two buildings in the background is something that it uses a lot. This sounds insane, but supposedly it works. There's people on YouTube that are really obsessed with it. They're like, look, it can tell I'm in, East New York right now because I took a picture and it understands the buildings being separated.
Yeah.
It's also been hijacked immediately by men stalking women on the internet because you can look at someone's fucking Instagram and then go, oh, computer, tell me where that person is. And it's like concerning, right? That technology has basically been handed off to a lot of different police departments. And there's a private version of GeoSpy that we just don't know anything about now because it's a police app. So it's probably not great. Greylark.
Cops are using it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like probably, potentially. Does it work?
This makes me wonder. See, to go back for a second to the Tom Homan and Eric Adams couch interview, they said there's some stuff in their meeting, in their agreement, that they can't talk about. I wonder if any of it is like AI and technology related. Could be.
Eric Adams is using AI to become even more in debt to Turkey. Google, how do I lose more money? So, I looked up a little bit about Greylark Technologies, this company out of Boston. I don't know. I'm just stabbing all throughout the different parts of the octopus here because it's seemingly endless. I thought this was kind of interesting. It apparently only has 5 employees. It's just one of those things. And it's one of its main investors has like 2 big investors. One of them is this company called HTX, which is from Singapore and is like intertwined with something called the Ministry of Home Affairs in Singapore. Which, if you know anything about Singapore, Singapore is a famously like authoritarian government. Like
Yeah.
there's a police state and it's fascistic, and a lot of the language that this company HTX has on its website is like about forging partnerships between startups and governments to help tech companies that do things like organize spatial recognition technology and data on populations to governments. So that's who our government is partnering with in so many ways, is like, you know, fucking authoritarian governments that we would probably all say, oh, that's, you know, against our freedom or whatever, right? Same fucking shit. Um, let's see. Okay, so there's a million of these. You could fucking read about them all day. They're all kind of the same story, though, right? Government's using AI, Border Patrol, Homeland Security, ICE. They're using AI to just develop a massive algorithm that supposedly can identify us. It's scary when it works, and it's scary when it doesn't work for different reasons. I was thinking about this a lot when I was reading about the last thing I'm going to talk about here, which is an AI program that Israel has been using. Right, I was reading about it. Oddly enough, in you know, if you think we're fringe weirdos and like, oh, all these stories come from Vice freaks and 404 and whatever the fuck you think, you know, is like a fringe, you know, leftist thing or whatever. This last story is just straight from NPR and it's from 2023. And obviously it was told from an NPR angle that was a little bit apologetic, but the facts are nothing that you can really rationalize. Israel uses like a mother AI algorithm program called the Gospel, which is kind of like a neon evangelion evil sort of vibe, in my opinion, to be killing people under this thing called the Gospel. Nevertheless, they're doing it. So the Gospel is tons of small AI programs that are then fed into a mother program, the Gospel, for quote unquote establishing targets. This is really interesting. It is not without its problems, reports NPR. The after action reported by Miss Saul's group noted that while that's like somebody they were talking about in the article, while the AI had plenty of training data for what it constituted a target, it lacked data on things that human analysts had decided were not targets. The Israeli military hadn't collected the target data its analysts had discarded, and as a result, the system's training had been biased. So Israel, throughout the entire fucking genocide, has been using this AI program to come up with targets because it will tell you what a target is. It is not factoring in the concept of something not being a target. That's probably why, you know, there's a justified narrative on their part, or they're crafting a narrative that it's justified to kill all these people because the program creates a document that tells them this is a justified target. Doesn't matter how accurate it is. It's obviously not being considered or criticized from within that it might have any level of inaccuracy. The Post states that the targeting division is able to send these targets to the Air Force and Navy and directly to ground forces via an app they use called Pillar of Fire. It's all so fucking evil. Some accusations about the gospel go further. A report by the Israeli publication Plus 972 magazine and the Hebrew language outlet Local Call asserts that the system is being used to manufacture targets so that Israeli military forces can continue to bombard Gaza at an enormous rate, punishing the general Palestinian population. So I think this is a really interesting like note here, something that has implications, right? Just that what is Israel doing? What have they been doing for fucking year and a half now or whatever, or year and some change? you know, crafting the narrative that continues justifying this genocide. A lot of that is coming out of this like tech jargon thing where the fact that it's an algorithm does the work for you, because if you're questioning the algorithm, you're questioning math and science and stuff, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
And they now have this idea to lean back on narratively at any given time. Well, this thing is a massive supercomputer, and it told us that this person is a violent Hamas person or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Now the goalposts of the argument have moved. You're arguing with that instead of, are you killing a bunch of innocent people? Well, did you tell us that? This is where I'm going to reiterate that Google told me that iced tea is the picture that goes with fucking ice, even when I didn't ask a question about ice, right?
Yeah.
Anyone can be falsely fucking, jammed into one of these things. Like it doesn't fucking work. It's complete, gobbledygook at this point. It's when it doesn't work, it's maybe more troubling than when it does work. When it does work, they can find out where you live based on your fucking social media. When it doesn't work, it means, people are going to be falsely labeled this or that by a government that doesn't care, because it's just trying to deport fucking everyone or whatever. So this distinction that we're hearing between, is this person a fucking MS-13 caravan violent fentanyl guy, or is it Abuela? It's like, for narrative purposes, it's to fucking make people feel better. But it also doesn't work. Abuela is going to be labeled an MS-13 and be deported anyway using all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, though. Is it possible that in some cases, this technology being so incompetent may be a good thing? Like that the ICE will fuck things up, or that some of these agencies or departments or whatever, they rely so much on AI and it gets them to not effectively do their jobs very well, and people get, maybe don't get as deported as much?
I mean, it's possible technically, but I don't really see personally. I don't fucking know, but my personal
Yeah.
take here is I think what you're going to hear is just the wrong people being targeted the same way I would describe. That's why I kind of brought this to Gaza, is that
Sure.
the wrong people are being targeted in Gaza very obviously, knowingly and willfully, but the thing here, the infrastructure of this is creating like an excuse to have done that. And I guess what I'm
Mhm.
worried about is that that's what's going to happen with border bullshit here, is that no, the failing of the AI is just going to be that it creates a legitimacy for recklessly rounding up and deporting anyone they want.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't know, maybe it produces people that aren't real, and they end up just chasing around the fucking it is my birthday AI image guy from Facebook, or the beautiful cabin crew, or one of my things I've been doing on Facebook recently is just tons of these middle-aged men that are like AI generated, and they're just like, I have a truck and need $70,000 and a wife, so maybe it'll go after them, and they don't exist. But what if you have the same
Okay.
name as one of those guys, and then you just go like, congratulations, you're deported?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I every my intuition here is no. It can't. It doesn't matter if they're wrong about something; they'll just do it, and this just creates a means for them to do it. But I would love to be
Yeah.
proven wrong.
I mean, it seems like that, yeah, the possibility is very strong that they'll deport somebody who's a U.S. citizen, and the issue totally on the table for an opposition party to pick up and be like, this thing needs to be stopped, and we need to curtail the surveillance state. Our data needs to stop being used in this way, which would be an immensely popular issue that for the past decade plus, Democrats just have not, or nobody really, other than like a few fringe civil libertarians, have made this an issue. But that there's like probably a kind of populist energy you could tap into behind, like, let's scale this back and not have technology intrude into our lives, and tech companies have this much of an understanding of who we are and a misunderstanding of who we are, and be in charge of this much stuff and data. But there's been no effort really to curtail it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, American citizens have been deported throughout the entire history of ICE and Homeland Security. It happens a lot. Again, it was reported on more, I think, during Trump. But it's going to happen again, and it's been happening for so long that I'm assuming you can't just attribute it all to to this stuff. It's probably like just bureaucracy in general, which this all this technology claims to be. Whenever they ask about it, whenever Israel's asked about it, or whenever like people from ICE are asked about it, is that it's just automating like the stuff we already used all this bureaucratic stuff for. Which, given how everything is being gutted right now, it's like, okay, well, so this thing that doesn't work is going to replace a thing that also didn't work. Um, I don't know. I think that's what you just said is a really important like angle, I think. But I mean, think about that guy you were describing. Think about Homan and his thing of seeing a bunch of people die in a shipping container and saying, "I got to get more racist."
Yeah.
Like with this question of whether any of this stuff is functioning and there's byproducts of it that the Democrats could latch onto. Well, I mean, this leaves them open to do the worst possible thing, which I think is usually what they do because they're
Yeah.
the other fucking are the friendlier face of capital, which is to say there are problems with our border security, with our border management apparatus. Instead of saying we should not have this, they're going to say we should do it better, right? We should
Right.
make the surveillance state accurate, which also wouldn't be good because if it's functioning the way they say it is, that's also not good because that means just deporting people who don't deserve to be deported, not because they aren't here illegally, but because being here illegally should not be a thing. Like there's no such thing as an illegal human. That is something that we should actually be fighting against, even having as a concept. The goalposts have
Right.
just moved to now are they illegal or not or whatever. But
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
I'm not saying they will do that. Just like the opportunity is there, and like a lot of people, very few people, I imagine, are like, yes, I love that these tech companies have my data and are selling it and making billions of dollars off me and everybody else in this country. It's not a popular system, but yeah, they're not doing anything about it.
yeah. Well, it remains to be seen how this plays out, I guess. As long as I'm talking tech and as long as we're talking Israel and stuff now, there's one thing I wanted to touch on before I wrap up my little spiel here, which is that I don't know if you read Ken Klippenstein's newest Substack, but um it's basically, he's a FOIA guy and he gets leaked memos and stuff like that. And long story short, what he's arguing is that there was this Munich security conference, and this guy, Senator Mark Warner, was talking to former Congressman Mike Gallagher, the two people who sort of like birthed the TikTok ban.
Mm.
And essentially, what he's got a leak on here is them talking about how the quote unquote real story about what happened with that bill is that they were trying to ban TikTok unsuccessfully in Congress until October 7th, 2023.
Oh,
And what happened there is that they were able to garner support for the banning of the bill by weaponizing the idea that TikTok was spreading, quote unquote, anti Semitic propaganda. So I think the point of what he's saying is that the narrative we all got about it being about China was a total red herring. It was simply about raising consciousness about Palestine that they decided to go after TikTok.
wow.
Yeah. Which is why the China stuff was confusing because it didn't make any sense in a lot of ways. It's inconsistent with how we treat other big tech companies and stuff, which doesn't stop anyone from doing anything. But I think the angle of like, yeah, it was just politically the reason it worked so well and passed and had some bipartisan support is about the genocide.
Right.
Yeah, that's less related, but I thought I'd throw it in there because Klippenstein does good work,
Hmm.
Anyways, so yeah, I think I think we painted a picture for what's going on today. There's a dumb guy in charge of a fucking fleet of stupid computer guys, and that's the face of racism and ethnic cleansing in this country. 2025 incoming.
There you go.
With that being said, you got anything to
The Vanquished, other podcast, which recently launched a YouTube channel. We got some videos up there. The latest one we just dropped is with our own Alex Patak and Andrew Durso and Michael Dukakis. We got a couple other fun ones up there on YouTube. John Kerry, Marco Rubio. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, check out our Patreon.
Okie dokie. I hear a little birdie told me that Why You Mad might be coming back at some point, but I am not sure. So don't get mad at me if it doesn't actually happen. If you like that show, but it might come back. My other podcast. I have a show on the 22nd here in Los Angeles. It's called Picture This. There's gonna be cool animators from TV shows on it, like Adventure Time and BoJack Horseman. They animate stuff along to your set. It's at the Lyric Hyperion at 7:00 on February 22nd. And I think that's it for me. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there.
It's finished.
It's finished.